Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody here and to those online. I see we've got a few joining us. So it's a little more technically complicated than usual because I'm using a laptop and we're connected to Zoom, and I think it's going to work. So, but bear with me. Bear with me. Yeah, we'll make it work. So thank you very much for having me. In this talk, I'm going to focus on an action research partnership that I'm leading with universities in Canada. So my partners at University of Guelph in the department, their extension program there, which is the School of Environmental Design in Guelph, and partners I have in Sri Lanka at the University of Sardinia, and partners in the Caribbean at the University of the West Indies, the St. Augustine campus, which is in Trinidad. And what I'm going to be focusing on today really is one aspect of this partnership program, which is in the development and evaluation of a technology stewardship training program targeted primarily to extension and advisory services practitioners in those countries, or extension officers. The training component that I'm going to talk about today really serves as a foundation and a common framework for conducting action research with those extension practitioners. So we can think of it as participatory action research. We're trying to build that capacity to do that in the phase that we're now entering into this. So I'll be talking a lot about, mostly about the initial phase of the project that's done, and we're transitioning into the next phase now. And that obviously has been delayed because of COVID, but we're hoping that things will pick up in the fall again. So the goal of the research overall is really to better understand the role of social intermediaries in promoting effective use of information and communication technologies within agricultural communities of practice. And I'll unpack that a little bit in the presentation. So first question I probably should answer is, how did I get into this? I don't have a background in agriculture. I'm a media and communications scholar. My background is in media and communications. So I first ended up in Sri Lanka following the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which you may recall. 250,000 people died as a result of that disaster. 40,000 in Sri Lanka alone died. And the tragedy, the great tragedy of that event was that the population in Sri Lanka actually could have been notified over an hour in advance of the waves arriving, but there was no warning system in place to let them know. So I was working at the London School of Economics at the time in the Media and Communications department. That was my first job after my PhD. And long story short, I had been doing research on the West Coast tsunami warning system in Canada with my PhD supervisor. And after the tsunami happened, an alumnus from Simon Fraser University, where I did my PhD, so the social network, right, the connection between my social network and him, he was in Sri Lanka leading a Canadian project to study community-based hazard warning systems. A little bit too late after the Indian Ocean tsunami, but nonetheless trying to build capacity to mitigate future disasters in the country. So that was my first trip to Sri Lanka in 2005, 2006. And then I became very interested out of that project in the difficulties of effective and sustainable technology use, particularly in low and middle income countries, because I could see in that project that while we were deploying some interesting technologies for community-based hazard warning, I knew as soon as the project ended, those technologies would fall into disuse. And sure enough, they did, right? So that really got me interested in saying, well, how do we actually work with people in these countries and in these communities to build more sustainable systems that can be better integrated into the daily lives of these people, so that they're not just these kind of research projects where you drop in, everything's great, and then you leave, and then it all goes to dust, right? So that's really what motivated it. And then I got into a second project in Sri Lanka looking at real-time biosurveillance with my colleague there, who was very interested in the use of mobile phones in the healthcare system. And then we ended up in agriculture through some colleagues who said, you know, we're really interested in mobile phones. This is around 2011. how can mobile phones help these smallholder farmers and extension officers to better communicate and share information? And that's really what launched the project. So I've learned over the years in working in that field, although I'm not trained in agriculture extension, that extension is very much a media and communications field. And so I felt, once that dawned on me, I realized, well, you know, we have a lot in common. And I get the benefit of learning about tropical agriculture when I'm there, which I find fascinating. So I get this little side benefit of going out to the farms and the fields and learning about that in addition to my background. Before I go further, do you guys know what extension? I mean, I don't mean to. Maybe you do. Do you know? Because I don't think it's common in here in Canada, right? Extension, ag extension is not very common anymore. So is it a new term? We don't need to explain it? Okay, great. Even though I came from the Faculty of Extension at the U of A, there was no ag extension going on when I was there, which used to confuse everybody in Sri Lanka. So this is a video, 6-minute video from a workshop we did in Trinidad in 2018, and I'm going to play it. Hopefully it'll work for us. It gives a nice overview of the project, and you can hear the participants talking about it as well as me. So cross your fingers, let's see if it works for us. There we go. There's a slight delay here between the click and.
Agricultural and rural development scholars and practitioners throughout the Caribbean have been trying to find answers to the question of how organizations and communities can best benefit from using information and communication technologies, or ICTs, in their work. In March 2018, researchers at the University of the West Indies, in collaboration with 2 Canadian universities, the University of Alberta and the University of Guelph, organized a short course to develop the capacities of individuals and organizations for ICT adoption and use in agricultural communities of practice.
So in the next 2 days, we are introducing participants to the concept of technology stewardship as a leadership practice in working with communities to help advance their capabilities using ICTs and integrating those ICTs into their agricultural practices, and also to the concept of communities of practice itself. So thinking about the groups that they work with, not as isolated individuals, but as groups that work together around a shared concern or domain of interest. And in so doing, bringing those 2 concepts together, we present a series of steps that they can take to identify the needs that a community of practice might have, how to apply those needs or think about those needs as a communication opportunity, thinking about ICT tools that might address that need, and then looking at a way to introduce those tools through platforms such as Facebook or WhatsApp or Google or any number of platforms.
Participants from various organizations, including agricultural extension services, the private sector, producer organizations, and regional development organizations were invited to participate in a series of activities based around an emerging leadership model of technology stewardship. Additionally, participants shared their experiences working with ICTs in their communities.
Being a national focal point for the FAOJ project, Climate Change Adaptation in Eastern Caribbean Fisheries Sector, I was hoping that coming to this course will give me the tools to basically sell a new ICT tool that we're hoping to develop to improve the lives of fishers. And this course actually added more in that it allowed us to develop a transitional tool, which being WhatsApp, right, which would make it easier to incorporate our new app for their use, which would undoubtedly improve their quality of life.
Well, when I first came in, my expectations for the workshop was simply to be able to communicate with the farmers I deal with back home. And in doing that, I wanted to be able to incorporate various forms of technologies to be more efficient and effective in the field. Now, since attending the workshop for the first day, I've gotten much more than that. So I know how to organize an initiative, set objectives, choose a specific ICT tool, and also create a campaign to more or less test by trial and error if it'll be effective with helping the farmers or not. So I'll know how to adjust to be effective and how to move forward in the weeks and months to come in the field and on the farms.
This short course is part of an ongoing action research project with researchers in Canada, Sri Lanka, and Trinidad and Tobago. Using an action research methodology, the project aims to test low-cost technologies with communities in a technology stewardship model. The intention is to build the capacities of practitioners who work closely with farmers, fishers, and rural communities to improve and enhance the use and adoption of low-cost digital technologies for communications, training, and knowledge transfer.
So this course actually opened up my mind to how you can use certain tools when you're liaising with different stakeholders and within the industry. So I know I'm going to use it not only for my postgraduate studies, but also for work and business as well. I worked with an expert group. We had representatives from the Extension Services of the Ministry of Agriculture, a member and director of the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, a member of a private organization, ANFAS, and someone from ICA. And we created a program, an actual program in tech stewardship that you could utilize within the sector. So I think the course exceeded my expectations.
So this was an introduction to technology stewardship. I think in future, what we've been looking at doing is more specialized courses, in particular ICT platforms. Some of the ones we discussed in the classrooms seemed very interesting to the stewards, and there may be an interest in figuring out or doing training on more specialized applications. We also think there may be more advanced training in community engagement methods as well as an evaluation methods related to the course. Once the stewards have a baseline training, then they can begin to specialize in more detailed types of activities and tasks.
There. So that was from March 2018. That was the first workshop we ran in Trinidad, and then we ran a second one subsequent year, and we've done two in Sri Lanka. So that gives you kind of an overview of the project. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. So, a lot of that initial work there is really trying to, sort of proof of concept. Can we develop a curriculum? Do they, does it make sense to them? Does it add value to what they're doing? And does it set a foundation for us to do research going forward? And so again, the goal of the research is to better understand the role of social intermediaries in promoting effective use of information and communication technologies as agricultural communities of practice. So what is effective use? Well, simply put, effective use is a term coined by Michael Gerstein, who works in the community informatics literature. And it refers to the capacity and opportunity to successfully integrate ICTs into the accomplishment of self or collaboratively identified goals. So, it's really about aligning the technology with the needs and the aspirations of the community and the capacity. It's about empowering the community to make decisions about technology use and adoption. Welcome. So why are social intermediaries an important focus? Well, from research that draws on multidisciplinary perspectives, there's good evidence to suggest that social intermediaries can play a crucial role in promoting effective use within the agricultural community, especially when they're embedded in that local community. For example, Soren Gigler's work on the study of rural poor in Bolivia looked closely at the role of intermediaries in technology programs and concluded that the presence of an effective and local intermediary is an essential factor for enabling poor people to enhance their well-being through the use of digital technologies. And how do they do that? What is that an intermediary does? Well, they help the community members to interpret, appropriate, and enact digital technologies that are suited in ways that fit their local sociocultural context. So rather than imposing it, they work with the community to find a good fit. They work to make the use of ICT meaningful for their everyday lives and to enable people to enhance their informational capabilities, which ultimately translates or can translate into improvements in their human and social capabilities. So this is Gigler's concept of informational capabilities. So Gigler developed this concept, and he argues that the intermediary plays an important role in influencing the people's abilities to develop these capabilities. And it's a multi-dimensional construct. So you can see here it encompasses different aspects. It's more than just being able to use technology, but it's also being able to be an effective communicator with digital technologies, having a level of information literacy, and also being able to create content. So not just being a consumer of the technology, but being a producer and a content producer. The term communities of practice, which is also integral to our work, refers to a unit of social organization, which is an important focus for our work. It's also used in other extension research to look at groups of people who share a concern or a set of problems or a passion about a topic and who deepen their knowledge and expertise by interacting in an ongoing basis. So this is a kind of social learning or situated learning, and it's important because quite often the impetus for using digital technologies cuts across professional, civic, or cultural concerns. So it's often networks that are more complicated than maybe traditional or formal organizational frameworks. They're often much more mixed up in terms of the social network. And communities of practice is a way to conceive of how people come together around topics or a domain of interest. Communities of practice approach conceives of the intermediary role in relational terms as a kind of leadership practice that mobilizes people to work together in pursuit of some shared enterprise. And more specifically, this technology steward concept, first introduced in this book, Digital Habitats, by Wenger, White, and Smith, describes this role with respect to digital technologies. So technologies are stewards. These are people with enough experience working with technology to understand it in the context of their community of practice. And they play a leadership role in the sense of helping that community to form a vision and think about how technology may enhance or complement what they're doing. And in certain respects, it seems like a natural fit for extension practitioners because their primary role, after all, is to engage with farmers and others to foster innovative practices, whether that's agronomic techniques or introducing digital technology for communication, even things as simple as using social media for marketing, right? It can go all the way up to more complicated things, using more advanced digital technologies, informatic systems in the field. Although we see less of that in countries like Sri Lanka at this time. And so interestingly enough, though, although it seems like a natural fit, the concept and approach of stewardship as laid out by Wenger and White Smith really wasn't applied in any systematic way or in depth with extension and advisory services. The FAO, the UN FAO, had a course titled Social Media for Development, where they had a module on technology stewardship, but it only really covered a very thin slice of what they talk about in this book. So we saw, an opportunity here to really build on what they had pioneered with this book and adapt it for this particular sector. I should add that the technology stewardship approach could be applied to many sectors, could be applied to health sectors. It's often applied into educational areas. So our work is probably some of the first work, the only work I've really seen that's applied it in a systematic way to the agriculture sector. So digital habitats, very briefly, that's because it's in the title of my talk and it's an important concept. What is a digital habitat? So community of practice, when we talk about a digital habitat, well, it's the portion of a community's practices, routines, the community's life that's enabled by a configuration of technologies. That's the way Wenger and White and Smith talk about it. And they don't really go into a lot of detail about what a digital habitat is, but when I scratched below the surface and started digging around, I found it shares a lot of features with this notion of communication or communicative ecologies from Foth and Hearn, which they see as a kind of relational approach to understanding dynamic relationships between social practice, discursive practices, and technology use, right? So that overlapping area is really what, so it's not just, a digital habitat's not just technology, but it's also the social networks that are enabled by that, and the discursive layer, meaning the kinds of themes, the topics, the kind of content and information that flows around in that environment. So that relational piece means as you change any one of these pieces, particularly as you change the technology, it's going to have an effect in that habitat. So a systems idea, really. So the aim of enhancing informational capabilities through tech stewardship is also a development strategy that we think is consonant with Amartya Sen's capabilities approach. The capabilities approach is a paradigm for human development that calls for creating conditions to enable individuals to achieve greater degrees of freedom and self-determination in how they live their lives through something called achieved functioning. So Sen's work is as a counterpoint to other development paradigms that may emphasize more economic growth. Sen's approach tends to emphasize more of a holistic view on development, taking in all of human life and well-being as a measure of a normative framework for measuring development. So the role of technology in that framework is really as a kind of an input to build people's informational capabilities, right? And those capabilities are things that, so having access to a mobile phone and being able to use it well means like you might be able to get information, healthcare information for your child that you couldn't get before. It might mean in the context of agriculture being able to share a photo with an extension officer with a picture of a diseased plant, right? So the capability set is enhanced by the digital technology. What farmers and other stakeholders do with those capabilities is referred to as their achieved functionings, right? So you can think of that as potential, right, and actualized functions. And so the role of the steward in this model is really as a kind of conversion factor. The steward helps the community to activate this capability set, but the stewards really, the communities are trying to define their own goals, right? So the community, the steward works at the beginning to assign priorities, set goals, helps them activate the capability set, and supports the achieved functionings. And we use the action research in there between the work of the steward, the capability set, and the choice of the agency that community members have. Through that capability set, you become more capable of making informed decisions about what technology you want to use, how you're going to use it, and importantly, what technology you might not want to use, because that's the flip side of it, right? Digital technology is not a solution for everything. Sometimes the vendors like to tell you it is, but it's not. So we also work with the stewards to say sometimes when you're working on these priority settings and you're doing your action research, maybe that digital technology is not what is needed in this situation. So we try to make sure we emphasize that as well. So that's a schematic that we use to help inform sort of the logic of the research design. The other piece that we draw on from the capabilities approach is Dorothea Klein's work, her so-called choice framework. And so when she talks about capabilities, she talks about a ladder of empowerment. So I'll talk about that on the next slide. And this is kind of what we, when we boil down what a tech steward's supposed to do, right down to its kind of essence, we sort of bring this slide up and we talk to them. We say there's really 4 things you're trying to do as a steward. You're trying to empower the communities to make informed choices about their use of technology and then support them in that. So let's start gradually, tech stewards. We begin simply by making the community aware that they have different choices, right? You can do things digitally rather than traditionally. So just pointing out, maybe we can send a text message instead of having the extension officer spending 3 hours in the vehicle, coming out to your farm for a half an hour meeting. Maybe that he or she can text you, or maybe he or she can text you just to make sure to remind everybody that there's going to be a meeting, so that when he or she shows up, you're all there for it, right? So that's very simple, but it's how you begin to get people thinking. The tech steward then can help the community develop a clear sense of choice. That means giving them examples, maybe from other communities or from other experiences they've had of how they could take advantage of those digital tools, and helping to address this sort of idea of adaptive preferences. So a lot of times communities, and particularly women in communities, will say, I can't do that, because they've been told they can't do that. So the sense of choice is trying to get that empowerment idea. Well, you can do that. Here's an example of others who have done that. Then it's facilitating the use of choice. So the steward then is helping that community to assist with trying out a new digital practice. Hey, let's try using the text messaging. Hey, let's try taking some photos of your plants, try sending them to me, right, over WhatsApp or what have you. And then recognizing and sustaining the achievement of choice, which is, we train the stewards in a technique where they can develop campaigns, which are these sort of mini action research projects. And one of the things we try to encourage the stewards to do is to kind of do simple evaluations of their pilots. So, what worked, what didn't, what was kind of a breakthrough moment, what are some obstacles. And so we talk about the achievement of choice, not necessarily being successful implementation of a technology, but a successful pilot means that we understand why something did work or why something didn't work. It didn't work because nobody wants to use it. It didn't work because it's too hard to sign up. It didn't work because it costs too much on our data plan. It didn't work because, the local village leaders didn't want us doing it, or whatever, right? So the achievement it's not synonymous with success, but it is synonymous with understanding why something's working or not. Okay, so we can frame that in a leadership context quite often, to talk about stewardship when we do it in the classroom. And sometimes we compare it to John Cotter's change leadership model. So this is just showing you the stewards begin with the community engagement process, then they do rapid prototyping with the technology, and then they run this campaign, this pilot action research project with their community. And that parallels Klein's choice framework, which I just mentioned. And then if we map Cotter's change leadership model, there's some similarities there in terms of what they're doing, which I don't need to get into a lot of detail, but it helps us to explain to the stewards that you're in a kind of leadership role here, and what you're trying to do is lead change. So the project's origins go back to 2012. We started with a series of workshops and visits in Sri Lanka, working closely with the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Sardinia. And we continue with that partnership with the Postgraduate Institute of Agriculture there. U of A I'm pleased to say U of A has signed an MOU with them. So that took a long time, but that's going to be great to open up future opportunities. And we also work with the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the University of the West Indies. These are different cohorts. So this is Sri Lanka 2016, Sri Lanka 2018, Trinidad 2018, Trinidad 2019. Interesting mix of people. And really, I just have to say, it's a lot of fun working with them. The workshops are a lot of work for everybody, but it's a 2-day intensive, and we have a lot of fun. And there's a lot of really interesting conversations going on in relation to the course material, but also, the extension officers themselves are, they've told us that, there's a lot of networking going on in that space too. So there's a lot of added value for them beyond the course, which I think is important, that they can walk away from this feeling like it was worth their time. So again, we're just trying to establish the course and build this capacity for doing future research. We will be running future courses as well. So the course basically is conducted over 2 days. We cover 4 sessions. It's pretty rushed. It's pretty tight. We're trying to figure out better ways to deliver it. But you can imagine, they have to leave the field. They have to leave their offices and come. So for 2 days, that's a pretty significant commitment for them to be in a classroom with us. And so what we're trying to do is introduce some hybrid training, pre-course work and stuff using Google apps to augment that. Each session includes a mix of short lectures, hands-on activities, group discussion. These photos show these are some of the early community consultations that we did initially, and then there's some of the classroom work. So participants working in small groups directed through a set of activities. We use a case-based method. We have a course workbook that is available as an open educational resource through Open Education Alberta. This is basically, this can be applied in any country. It's an all-purpose workbook. And then what we've developed localized case study booklets. So there's a booklet for Sri Lanka and there's a booklet for Trinidad, which has localized case examples, local maps, so it makes sense in the local context. We've translated the Sri Lankan one into Sinhalese, which is really interesting to look at. And it really revolves around, so these modules, so principles and practice of stewardship. We do the case-based introduction. We do some community engagement work. Extension practitioners are already well trained in community engagement, so we're just adding another layer to that that's more oriented to the technology piece. We're trained in problem identification, priority setting, and goal setting in relation to technology. Trained in techniques for ICT prototyping and testing with low-cost technologies. So Google, Facebook, social media, we start with simple stuff that's free, easy to use, right? That's where we encourage them to begin. And from there, they can go on up. Then they train in some techniques in selecting, configuring, testing ICTs, campaign planning and evaluation, and then how to plan a pilot, collect data, and evaluate outcomes. So we cover a lot in 2 days. But you know what? They're troopers and they get through it, and we have a lot of fun with it. So our goal during this initial phase was to develop and assess the training materials with the practitioners. The exploratory phase really was focusing on the experience and the impact of the training program at this cohort level, and the experience and the impact of the training also at the individual participant level. So we use this Kirkpatrick model to assess this course at the cohort and individual levels. The model takes into account different styles of training, considers both short and long-term effects. It's got 4 levels: reaction, listening, or learning, behavior, and results. We've assessed it on each of those levels. The results we're not, I'll come to the results in a minute, because we're not in a position to really look at the longer term impact at this point. So level 1 of the Kirkpatrick model is reaction. So we measured reaction to the course using anonymous individual course evaluations. Level 2 is learning. So we documented the activities they were doing in the classroom. We took photos. They shared their work using a WhatsApp group. So we documented it as they created these e-portfolios. The graduate research assistants were given observers handbooks. So they were recording notes as they were watching the groups working in the learning activities. Level 3 behavior, each participant completed an individual action plan indicating their intent to act on the learning in the course. And the IAP asked them what kind of techniques and activities that they intended to apply in practice. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then level 4 results. Participants were invited to complete a capping project activity and submit a report on it. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And for those who did that, we offered them an advanced certificate. So this was an introductory course. We said, if you want to do a capping project, you can be awarded an advanced certificate. So we don't have any direct measures really on the long-term impact of stewardship, but that's not the intent of the first phase. So, is it really improving life in the community practice? I don't know yet. It's too early to tell. But let's talk about the course itself. So at level 1, all of these are positive. So we asked them, are the goals of the objective course clear? Yes. So that's for Trinidad, that's for Sri Lanka, and that's for Trinidad. I only have 3 surveys because we introduced the survey after the first one. So positive reaction to the course. They felt that it increased their knowledge. They felt the instruction quality was good. This is all good stuff, right? Overall assessments that the course was excellent. So this is all stuff we wanted to hear, right? They liked the curriculum. They liked the instructors. It was 2 days well spent. Great, that validates the material. Wonderful. Evaluations, of course, aren't perfect indicators. And in the comments, we did get useful feedback on a number of the sessions and other things. So I don't want to whitewash it, but generally the evaluations reinforced, gave us confidence that we've got some solid material. Check that off the list. So at level 2, at the learning level, we were documenting activities in the classroom. So were they able to complete the activities? Were they actually learning stuff, right? They had fun in the course, but were they actually learning stuff? Were they able to do the activities? So they were organized into small groups, each with 4 to 6 members. Each group was using the course workbook. They were doing these kind of tabletop community of practice activities. So usually somebody in the group suggested, oh, I work with beekeepers in the Candy District, so let's do our hypothetical campaign based on my experience. And so what we found is that each of the groups, this is the Sri Lanka example, you know what, they were able to actually complete these activities. They identified a community of practice. They identified a priority action for their community practice. This was an instructional project for these beekeepers. They developed a campaign objective. So we take them through a technique where it's a structured goal statement that they develop. So yeah, we're going to introduce a new beehive box for this community. And then through the techniques we introduced, they said we want to use group messaging and video tutorials for that.
So, okay, so you're trying to measure whether these people are learning. If you have sort of a control group which you didn't get that kind of training that you get compare across the two groups, did you get that?
No, we don't have a control group because at this point in this, as I said in the research, we're just trying to determine, are they able to achieve these learning objectives in the classroom?
Yeah.
So when you go to the next phase, you know, a quasi-experimental design like that might be possible, although I'm not sure how we would actually carry that out. I would have to think about that more carefully because there would be so many confounding intervals because everybody talks to everybody else, right? I'm not sure I could have a pure control group there, but.
No, but you do get an idea of how it's effective to a class.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, but it's just a combination of the things.
Yeah.
But still, most people who are not in the class,
Yeah.
they don't get the info, right?
Yep.
I don't know.
Well, another way to do that actually would be because there are individuals out there in the community who are doing this without the training,
Oh, okay.
right? They're sort of, they don't know, we don't call them tech stewards, they haven't been trained, but you know, when I talk to the extension hours, they say, oh, so-and-so's been doing this, been using this to do this. So maybe rather than a control group, what we do is it's more naturalistic inquiry. We find individuals who haven't been trained but are doing similar things and look at the 2 different experiences and compare whether training adds, what kind of value training adds to it to make the case for that. So that's something we would certainly be looking at doing in the next phase. So this was, you know, and this was, they were all able to achieve this on paper and in the workbooks and design a campaign plan. And then we asked them level 3 at the behavior level, just sort of testing that, how much the course influenced their intention to act on this learning. And you know, 87%, if this is the Sri Lanka case, said yes, they intend to do a capping project. Trinidad was a little more, I think, a little more honest in their response, with 55% saying they're not sure, right? So, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's just an intent to act, and it does speaks to, I guess, how the course motivates them, right? The reality is when they try, and I'm not going to get into details in this talk, but the reality is when they try some of them did try to do capping projects and they run into lots of obstacles. They don't have resources, they don't have time. Their senior manager, administrator doesn't want them doing it, doesn't think it's a good use of their time, et cetera, right? So there were lots of people, there were individuals who wanted to do it, but just couldn't for various reasons. So of the 40 participants in the last two cohorts, so 20 in Sri Lanka and 20 Trinidad, about 10 of those, I think 11 of them, actually who said they were going to do a capping project actually did one, and they submitted a capping project report to us. And that capping project report, we told that can be a document. You could do a photo voice thing, take some pictures, annotate them. So we got a mix of documents and images and really kind of an interesting collection of reports. Some of them did one activity out of the workbook. Some of them did a couple of activities out of the workbook. We had one individual who did a whole campaign. His name's Pradeep, and he's like sort of like the poster person, tech steward, right? He got it, he understood it, he was motivated. So, and actually we're still working with Pradeep. He's helping us in the second phase, providing lots of feedback on the work on the material we're developing. And another, just a side note too, a couple of these, and I don't recall which ones, but we said, try to do it within about 8 weeks or something, right? Submit it. We tried to not put too much pressure on them. And I got an email from my colleague Uva Sarah, and she says, this is 8 months later, right? She says, I got a capstone project from one of the participants. He just submitted it. So I thought, well, that's great, because it meant it's kind of stuck with him, right? And he waited until he was able to do it. So these were some of the kind of projects they were doing. Some of them were very simple, working with seed paddy producers, trying to using text messaging, fairly obvious. This was Pradeep's work. He was working for the Tea Research Institute, and he was trying to coordinate a scheduling of maintenance activities at the Tea Technopark. So his campaign was really trying to introduce some kind of, and it's pretty simple stuff, but he's trying to introduce a shared scheduling app for the other extension officers so they could coordinate their maintenance activities. Right? They'd been doing it on paper and by phone calls, and everybody's phoning each other, and the maintenance doesn't get done. So he was able to introduce that, and what we found, it seems simple, but actually there's a lot of resistance. So that was a really important learning for him. Pradeep said, well, the potential is there. I've got to work on this a little bit more with this community to get the buy-in. So it always reminds me, coming from Canada, we take a lot of things for granted in terms of our technology use, what's available to us, and even the culture of how we use technology. So even these little breakthroughs, I think, are really significant in this context, and we try to, make the most of those for the participants. So here's a couple more examples. This is Suranjan. He was using a problem tree activity with the farmer group he works with, and they were doing some brainstorming, and they had come up with the idea that they could use mobile phones to communicate with the extension officer. Again, seems kind of obvious to us maybe, but he had to do a number of things with this group, including expanding the sense of choice. So he had to run a series of small tasks with the farmers, just doing simple text messaging activities, just to teach them how to be able to do it on their phone and get comfortable doing it. Without doing that initial kind of work, building that sense of confidence, there's no way they would use the text messaging. So again, we have to progress in small steps, right? This is from Trinidad. This is Muriel and Marvin. They attended our project in 2019. Our cohort 2019, and they were working with trainers in the fisheries area, and they were developing a campaign that eventually led to them identifying some video streaming software that they could use to enhance the training function for the STFP training group in the fisheries.
In the context of fisheries, what what were the things that these extension officers, how do they basically get involved in the fisheries?
Sorry, yeah, I should be more clear. So in Trinidad, when we invited the cohort, we actually invited individuals who were fisheries in the fisheries division. So
So how can you characterize the contact that they have with the fish? What purpose do these extension officers serve with respect to the fisheries?
right. So Muriel and Marvin, they, in this case, they're not working directly with fishers. They're working with the trainers group. So that's their community of practice. So this is a community of practice of trainers who work with fishers. And the idea here was, how can these trainers get better access to video content in real time or near real time, so that when they're with the fishers, if they want to show them something, that they've got an app or a platform that enables them to deliver that content in real time. So again, we would probably go, well, you just use YouTube, right? But
Yeah.
we want it to be a more systematic process. We want them to think through different options. Yeah. Okay, so to summarize, I just was focusing on that one particular aspect of the project. The goal of the partnership, we want to build that capacity for inclusive innovation through this training program with these advisory services officers in these countries. We're using the social intermediary approach. We're using the communities of practice literature. As far as I can tell, it's really a new spin on the COP, on the technology stewardship concept from that literature. I haven't seen it done anywhere else quite this way. And we're integrating the capabilities approach as our normative sort of framework for development, right? So that's another important piece to keep in mind. So this initial phase has been really important in developing, let's say, operationalizing the technology stewardship approach from White and Winger, putting it into a curriculum, testing the curriculum with this group, and then building a baseline by which we're able to carry out more extensive participatory research in the future going forward. So the next stage is going to be expanding on that capping project component. So we introduced it as an idea. We said, if we introduce a capping project option, will people do it? And it looks like many of them will. So we're going to expand that component in the next phase. And we're going to try to build in more supports for the stewards as they do their capping project, and use that as a vehicle, if you want to think of it that way, for doing more in-depth longitudinal research with those individuals as they work with their communities, right? And be able to collect more detailed or qualitative data on what they're doing, the experiences they're having, the breakthroughs, the challenges, and so on. And we're going to be using that also as an opportunity for graduate students here in Canada and Sri Lanka and Trinidad to connect together to support those capping projects. So you can imagine that our cohort, we've got, let's say we got a cohort of 20, we got about four to six individuals who say they're going to do a capping project. We will assign graduate students to be their support liaison person for up to a year. They will maintain contact with that steward by email or by phone, doing monthly interviews and check-ins, collecting data with them. And then we'll bring everybody back together a year later, and then we'll have an event where we can award them with their advanced certificates, share stories, right? Have a kind of focus group session to bring that all together. And hopefully that will start to bring more of that insight around what they're actually doing and what they're up against. And hopefully, create some momentum for it in terms of getting buy-in from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Export Agriculture, and others if they recognize this as valuable. Both universities want to build it into their curriculum as part of their postgraduate training. That's been made clear to me. So we're hoping that by doing that, we'll be able to also carry out that research as well. This is the brochure that they created in Sri Lanka for the second one, and that's some of the team members there in Sri Lanka. So I'll be happy to share the slides. There's some of the literature, and this is a gorgeous painting actually from a hotel lobby in Kandy in Sri Lanka when I was there. So I loved it so much I took a photo of it. Elephants are a big part of the Sri Lankan culture. If you happen to be in Kandy in August, there's a big festival where they dress all the elephants up and parade them down the main street, and the Kandy dancers here down there. So they've been hit pretty hard by COVID. I think tourism is starting to come back. But if you ever get a chance to go to Sri Lanka, it's an amazing country. I highly recommend it. And who knows, maybe in the fall or in the winter, there might be a call for grad students who are interested in joining the team to come to Sri Lanka for a trip. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I'm always shocked when those seminars that when you present it, there's so much overlap and similarities and I wanted to ask you, so how did you recruit or how did the participants collect the program? Because I would believe that their motivations, where they stand and ICT and so on, has a big effect on the effectiveness.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's let me lay. It's kind of a convenience sample during the initial phase, but not quite. This is where the partnership piece is essential, right? Because my partners in Sri Lanka at the university and in Trinidad, they have good connections with those communities, and so we talked before as the project was being developed, and we identified the organizations we felt would be a good mix of people, so private, public sector extension organizations, and I left it largely up to them to identify which individuals in those organizations they would want to contact to see if they would put forward individuals or nominate individuals from the organization to participate in the course. And so we had a mix. We had a mix of males and females. The average age was about 35 to 40. All of them had pretty much had some kind of postgraduate degree, usually some type of diploma. In terms of the technology, the aptitude and the interest in technology, that varied a little bit in the cohort. So there were individuals who were clearly well experienced, and there was others who had very little experience. And some of them were clearly voluntold to come, and others were coming because they found it really interesting. So we do a pre-course survey before they show up, where we collect that background information. In the next phase, I'm working with the partners. We're trying to be a little bit more proportive in the sample and thinking about, and so I'm in that consultation stage right now, discussing with them who are good candidates, who do we think are good candidates for tech stewards, based on what we've learned, what's the profile we're looking for, in terms of their background, in terms of their seniority in the organization, and so on. Okay.
I mean, you are doing research on this topic at the same time you're designing, the work package. So a little bit between the two, you're not really, if you were just in the extension, you could sit there and just delivering the workbook and the workshop. But in the research side, get representatives who can add a bit more.
Yeah.
So you have to decide what you want to be more doing the research on the content or more the agent of delivery.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Can we have it both ways? I guess is what you're asking me, right?
I would say you can.
Well, depends what journal I'm submitting to, I guess. But yeah. So I would put it this way: as long as we are clear and transparent about the limitations related to the recruitment process and recognize what that may, how that may limit the generalizability of our findings, and so on. As long as we're clear about that and explicit, I think we can still do research in this area and add value to it. And of course, that's an epistemological argument that we could have. But I guess what really attracts me to this mostly, though, is the question, are we making a difference here for these extension practitioners at the end of the day? And if I don't feel like it's making a difference, then what's the point of even doing anything, right? Why do the research at all? I suppose. So. Yeah, it's a big concern, less so in Trinidad. In Sri Lanka, coverage is pretty good. It's a smaller landmass, right? So fewer cell towers, but very few people have, relatively speaking, very few people have desktop computers. So most of the things are access to Android smartphone or tablet, using a wireless data plan, quite often a pay-as-you-go plan. So yeah, it's still a major challenge. So we try to emphasize low cost. We try to emphasize being innovative, thinking about ways to use the apps that they're already using. But we often hear from them saying, well, I don't have coverage, or it's spotty. So it is an ongoing concern, and I think it's an important one to foreground because, again, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, digital technologies may not always be the right solution, because if the reliability isn't there or if it's too expensive, why are we trying to do that with this? Is there another way we can do this, right? At least now that's going to change too, right? I mean, we have to think in the next 5 to 10 years, right? Every time I go back, more people have smartphones. Coverage is a little bit better. Some area, Colombo's got LTE now, right? Some sectors will have 5G. So eventually it'll build out. But it is definitely still a major barrier. And smallholder farmers, I mean, they're still using 2G feature phones, a lot of them. Cracked screens, dusty keys, broken keys. It's great, but it's the reality, right? It's the reality. But they get what they need from that device. But yeah, so as part of the research acquiring, we initially we had done a little bit of that. We tried some tablets and other things. It's not the best investment of the resource because well, if it's a very focused question, you're asking about, let's say you've developed an app for a very specific agronomic type app, right? To measure something in the field or whatever. And you want to test the app and the features and the usability of the app. In that case, I could see deploying the tablets to test the app. But in our case, once the research team leaves, what happens to that tablet, right? Or that phone? It'll get used, but eventually when it becomes, if it's too expensive to charge the data plan up, or how long do tablets or phones last? 5 years, right? It falls into this use. So one of the things is, what technology do they have? What technology are they using right now? What can we do with what they have right now? Because that's going to be more likely to be sustainable over the long term, or at least the medium term until the technology expands the community. The other group, so I was just thinking, the other group that we haven't involved a lot is youth. And in the next phase, we want to get youth more involved. So we've been talking about having a cohort either mixed with youth or having a youth cohort. Well, there's a big problem both in Trinidad and Sri Lanka with getting youth involved in agriculture because they're not interested. And so I think if you can bring them to the table, that might be important, right? Getting youth interested and involved. Yep.
So I might have missed the last two slides, but I was wondering what motivated you to select these two countries in two different areas, two different cultures. Why did you select these two countries?
Yeah, so I explained for Sri Lanka it had come out of previous work I had done there. And so it was a natural extension of previous research I had been doing and my growing interest in the community and some strong partnerships that were developing there. In Trinidad, I had, to be honest with you, I had a relationship there. And so we began an initial conversation with the University of the West Indies, and there was interest expressed from the Dean of the Faculty of Food and Agriculture. And so we felt that that was a good place, recognizing there's significant differences in the countries. But some surprising similarities. So that was the basis for that, really. So it was partly the fact that to do this work, we need those strong partnerships in place, right? And because the roots of those partnerships were in place in both countries. We were hoping in the fall of 2020, we had planned we were going to be going to Chile to begin conversations there around possibly introducing Chile, but COVID put the stop to that. That's going to pick it up. My colleague, Untitled Chapter from the University of Guelph, he's from Bangladesh, he's got connections to Bangladesh, so that would be another country we might look to. You know, for me, it's really important to have those trust relationships with the partners because I don't want to be that guy that shows up, does the research, and never comes back again, right? And I don't want to be that guy that, well, it's very complicated. I'm sure some of you have done international research, right? It's very complicated work. I mean, just at the administrative level, moving money around to do a project like this logistically, because quite frankly, we don't want to try to move money through the university because it will go into a black hole. I'm not saying somebody's taking it. I'm just saying it'll get locked up in administration and nobody will get paid and we won't know where it is and it'll take 6 months for anything to happen. So when I was there, for the 2019 thing, I mean, I had to literally wire Chandana, you know, $3,000 in Canadian, my colleague Chandana, say, here's an advance for $3,000. I need you to cover all the expenses, keep all the receipts. And then when I come back to Canada, I'm going to have to plug all together and file the expense claim, right? So I have to trust Chandana with $3,000 and trust that Chandana is going to be able to keep the receipts. So, you know, that's the nuts and bolts reality, right? So having trusted partners is really important for this kind of work.
So you said before you end this portion that you're really interested now going to the result sections and really measuring the welfare impact. You've asked about the control group that might be what you can do, but you've got a plan for how you want to do that. And you know, founding factors all around, you could be measuring anything.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting question.
It is an interesting question. So the research design for this phase, as I say, we're building out the capping project component. So we'll be continuing with the course evaluation stuff we've done in the past as well. With the capping project is going to be a real intense research focus on this phase. So this will be identifying, working with those individuals who are working on capping projects, using a participatory action research approach, doing interviews, doing qualitative inquiry primarily, you know, and trying to understand again their experience. So there's some various things we're going to be looking at. This question of informational capabilities, this question around their ability to engage the community's members and which community members they're engaging. Who's engaging, who's not engaging. What are the different profiles of your community members? So there's a lot of different questions that we'll be trying to tease out of the interviews and the focus group conversations. Yes. Yeah. So one of the other components is, so if we want to break down the units of analysis, we look at the cohort. So we do the evaluation at the cohort level. So think of it as multiple embedded case studies. So multiple units of analysis. So there's the cohort level, then we look at the individual steward, we look at their profile, we look at what they're doing, we take their account of their experience using kind of narrative inquiry approach. And then there's the community of practice itself. So that is reaching out to the community of practice. It could be farmers, But again, it's a community of practice, so it could be fishers, could be trainers, right? Could be other extension officers. It's however that community practice is defined in the context of that capping project. And doing interviews with them, possibly doing some small scale questionnaires or surveys with them, saying how to go. Maybe I haven't discussed this with partners yet, but maybe even doing something with the stewards and the community practice together, some kind of group meeting or focus